Hong Kong officials say they've arrested 8 more people in connection to this week's deadly fire at an apartment complex. A commission is looking into possible corruption during a renovation there. Search and rescue operations are winding down, and the death toll has climbed to 128. Roughly 200 people.
The horrific scene unfolding overseas, the massive high-rise Inferno in Hong Kong. 7 apartment buildings on fire, each one standing 31 stories tall. The death toll rising, dozens killed, hundreds still missing.
Flames are terrifying on their own. But when fire climbs the side of a high-rise like a living creature, feeding on bamboo scaffolding that wraps the building like a cage, it becomes something else, something far more violent, far more unpredictable, and far more deadly. What unfolded in Hong Kong's Tai Po district wasn't just another apartment fire. It was a catastrophic chain reaction that began as simple renovation work, and turned into one of the most shocking urban disasters the city has seen in decades. It started in the middle of the afternoon. People were going about their usual routines, cooking, resting after work, scrolling their phones, or preparing to pick up their children from school. At 2:51 p.m., the first emergency call came in. A fire had broken out at Guangchong House, one of the residential towers in the sprawling complex. Within minutes, firefighters were racing through traffic, preparing themselves for what they thought would be a routine high-rise fire. Dangerous, yes, but manageable. They deal with these cases every year. But nothing about what they found was normal. As the first fire truck pulled up, a column of black and orange smoke was already pouring off the building, rising like a volcanic eruption. Flames weren't just appearing from windows, they were racing vertically up the exterior. That was the first sign something was deeply wrong. Inside, fires usually move horizontally, from apartment to apartment. But when a fire climbs the outside of a tower at that speed, it means fuel is present, fuel that should never have been exposed. That fuel was bamboo scaffolding. Hong Kong has used bamboo scaffolding for decades, a traditional method admired for its flexibility, strength, and low cost. For most construction projects, it works beautifully. But that afternoon, it became the perfect ladder for a fire hungry for oxygen. The flames latched onto the bamboo poles, shot upward, and wrapped around the building like a burning net. The mesh that covered the scaffolding trapped heat and embers, turning the entire exterior into a chimney. The firefighters saw the fire spreading at a rate that defied their expectations. In just minutes, flames reached the upper floors. The heat became so intense that even approaching the main entrance required protective gear and shields. Several residents were seen at their windows, crying for help, trapped as smoke engulfed their hallways behind them. The building's ventilation system carried smoke into floors that hadn't yet caught fire, creating chaos inside. The commander on scene made a crucial decision: upgrade the situation to a 5-alarm fire, one of the highest emergency levels. That meant calling in more units, more trucks, more ladders, more manpower. Within minutes, additional teams arrived with breathing apparatuses, thermal imaging cameras, and hoses capable of blasting thousands of liters of water into the blaze. But even then, the battle had barely begun. The temperature inside the affected floors was so high that firefighters couldn't enter without risking collapse or being overcome by heat. Smoke visibility was nearly zero. The bamboo exterior continued feeding the flames. Breaking inside would require time, a luxury no one had. Dozens of residents were still stuck in their apartments, some calling emergency hotlines, others waving shirts or towels from windows, hoping someone would see them. Crowds formed outside the complex. Some people recognized their buildings instantly, this was their home. Others were office workers walking by, shocked at the rapid escalation. Parents with young children were among the evacuees, many of whom had no idea where they were going, only that they had to move fast. Residents, more than 700 of them, were rushed toward temporary shelters set up in nearby schools and community centers. People who had been sitting on their couches just an hour earlier were suddenly homeless, clutching only their phones or whatever they grabbed before running out. Inside the smoke-choked hallways, firefighters fought floor by floor, inch by inch. Every step felt like a risk. Walls were burning. Doors were melting. Stairwells were filled with smoke thick enough to make breathing impossible without equipment. And every minute mattered, because inside some of those sealed apartments were elderly residents, disabled individuals, families with children, and workers who had been resting mid-shift. Casualties began to emerge. Some people were found unconscious in stairwells, overwhelmed by smoke before help could reach them. Others died in their apartments, unable to escape or break through blocked corridors. The official toll climbed steadily as rescuers made their way upward. By the time the fire was contained hours later, dozens were dead, making it one of the deadliest modern disasters in Hong Kong's urban residential history. But tragedy never happens alone, it always brings questions. And the biggest question here was simple: how did a renovation project turn into a deadly inferno? Investigators quickly turned their attention to the scaffolding. The bamboo structure wrapped tightly around multiple sides of the building, the way it commonly does during renovations. Plastic mesh, a standard to protect pedestrians from falling debris, now acted like a trap for heat, creating a fire corridor. Workers had been seen earlier in the day on the scaffolding. Tools, wires, and flammable materials were all present. A single spark, from electrical work, construction friction, or improperly disposed debris, could have ignited the fire. But the problem wasn't just how the fire started. The real issue was how fast it spread, and why the building's fire control systems couldn't contain it. Residents later reported that smoke alarms did not activate on several floors. Some said the emergency lighting in hallways failed. Others claimed the fire doors didn't close properly, allowing smoke to flood areas that should have been protected. Whether these claims prove true or not, they have ignited debate across the city. Within hours, Hong Kong authorities announced arrests related to the incident, including individuals tied to the construction project. Police deployed more than 400 officers to handle evacuations, crowd control, and investigations. Fire experts, structural engineers, and government regulators immediately began reviewing safety protocols, renovation approvals, and building inspections. Meanwhile, the city's political leaders faced intense pressure. Residents demanded answers. Families of victims demanded accountability. And many Hong Kongers asked the same haunting question: how could this happen in a modern, well-regulated city known for its efficiency? For American viewers, the disaster carries lessons that hit close to home. High-rise safety isn't just a Hong Kong issue, it's a global issue. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami have thousands of aging apartment buildings undergoing continuous renovation. Exterior scaffolding is common. Construction oversight varies. Fire safety checks are often inconsistent. And in many places, residents assume that modern infrastructure automatically means safety. But incidents like this show how fragile that sense of security can be. A single oversight. A single spark. A single structural weakness. And a building filled with families can transform into a towering inferno within minutes. In Hong Kong's case, the bamboo scaffolding created a perfect storm: natural material, open exposure, mesh coverings, and strong afternoon winds. Combined with dense population and limited escape routes, the results were devastating. For families who survived, the trauma will last far longer than any news cycle. Some lost loved ones. Some lost homes. Others lost faith in a system that was supposed to protect them. And for those who died, final moments were spent in darkness and heat, waiting for help that couldn't reach them in time. When the flames finally died and the smoke cleared, the skeleton of the building stood blackened against the skyline, an unforgettable reminder of what went wrong. Inside the charred walls, investigators continued their search for answers. Outside, loved ones gathered at makeshift memorials, laying flowers and candles on sidewalks still wet from fire hoses. In the days that followed, officials promised reforms. Safety protocols would be reviewed. Renovation regulations would be tightened. Emergency response systems would be analyzed. But for many, those promises came too late. What remains now is a city grieving, families mourning, and a global audience watching a tragedy that feels uncomfortably familiar, because it could happen anywhere. As cities around the world continue to build upward, as renovations become constant, and as thousands of buildings wrap themselves in scaffolding every year, the Hong Kong Inferno is no longer just a local disaster. It is a warning. A harsh, painful reminder that safety measures must evolve as fast as cities grow, and that even traditional construction methods, like bamboo scaffolding, must be re-evaluated when used in dense urban environments. The routine renovation that began at Guangchong House was never supposed to be dangerous. It was never supposed to take lives. It was never supposed to spread terror across a community. But the combination of materials, conditions, and failures turned it into a tragedy that will be studied for years. And in the end, behind every statistic is a story, a family waiting for someone who will never return, a resident who escaped seconds before collapse, a firefighter who risked everything to save strangers. These stories deserve to be heard, because they carry the human truth inside every disaster. When a city builds upward, it must also look inward. When a building burns, it exposes not only structural weaknesses but systemic ones. And when lives are lost, the responsibility to prevent the next tragedy becomes a promise every society must keep. Hong Kong now faces the long road of healing, rebuilding, and accountability. But for the world watching, including millions in the United States, the lesson is clear: safety is not guaranteed. It must be designed, enforced, and constantly questioned. Because all it takes is one spark to turn a quiet afternoon into a deadly high-rise disaster.